The moon was bright and high up in the sky, illuminating what was grounded below. He guided me into the woods, so beautiful this night that it seemed peaceful. The air was thin, and it nearly lured me in with the scent of something that reminded me of my childhood. But I could not place my finger on it. He called me by my name, and it touched my soul, the way his voice was longing for me forever and ever, as he had told me repeatedly. He led me down a dark path that came to a prepared tent and a pit of fire. The tent was not for me, but rather my gift to him for the night, the man who is feared by most who claim to be good and innocent. He asked me to sit, and I did. He kneeled down in front of me and stroked the side of my face. Gently, he whispered.
What a pretty girl.
He looked down at the markings on my arms.
A pretty junkie. It's a sin, you know.
But I'm doing this for you, I said. He smiled sweetly and stood up.
You may proceed.
Will you help me? I asked.
Of course.
He said and removed my bag from my shoulders.
You already seem quite out of it.
I took something to begin and quicken the process before we got here, I said, and this seemed to please him. I opened my bag and removed the items he told me to mix. I did it for him because he asked me to. I mixed the liquids into a glass I had packed for the special occasion and blended it all together with some water, making it easier for me to drink. I stared at the discolored liquid, pausing for a moment. Funny, isn't it? I said. He gave me a questioning stare.
What is?
I've been drowning in a well of my own sorrow for so long, and the only way for me to finally be free, to finally be with you, is to give myself to a different form of sorrow. He placed my hand on either side of the glass and guided the glass to my lips.
For an eternal life with me,
he said. For an eternal life with you, I said, and started to drink the liquids. At first they were horrid and I struggled to drink it, but he encouraged me by keeping a hold of my head and keeping my mouth open. I dropped the glass as it was done and felt a burning sensation run through my body. Finally. Pain. I had not been able to feel this in such a long time. He was right. It did work.
I want you to think back on your life, to that one moment you were so ashamed of, the moment you blame yourself so much for, the moment that finally broke you, that led you here, to this, to me.
He said, and then sat down in front of me.
And there's something you should know before your world goes dark.
I began to cough and I fell backwards as my body began to spasm with all kinds of pain. I wanted to scream, to let it all out, but fear vastly overwhelmed that urge. He studied me for a moment, and then carried on talking.
I am not who you believe me to be. I am not the destroyer. I am not the ruler of demons. I am not the lord of flies. I am not the deceiver of this whole world. I am you, a desperate yet necessary existence created from your darkness and your weakness. You needed me to exist because I am the culmination of your darkest fears and your strongest will, perfectly balanced.
I wanted to ask him more, wanted to know more, but my body was already convulsing. The pain was already too much to bear, but then it suddenly all vanished and I awoke gasping for air. But I felt different, lighter. My mind felt clearer than it ever has. It felt good. But this was all short-lived as I looked up and saw myself, or rather, my lifeless shell. I looked so tired. He was still sitting next to my corpse, staring directly at me as he slowly brought his hand up and pointed at something behind me. I turned around and noticed the forest we were in had lost much of its greenery. In fact, it looked as if it was decaying, but that instantly became the least of my worries as I saw what he was pointing at. Standing a few feet away from me were the bleak and rotting figures of what once used to be the people, and they were all looking directly at me as if they were hungering for me. I could feel their misery and despair, their sadness and hate, but most of all, their resentment towards me, and a strange longing for me to become like them. I turned around to run to him. I knew he would protect me, but the moment I did, I was standing face to face with my own corpse, her eyes white and lifeless, her face slowly peeling off as the green poison I had fed her for so long was oozing out of her eyes, nose, mouth, and through the ever-growing tears in my skin. I was appalled and horrified by what I saw, but I was frozen in fear as all I could do was watch her face slowly melt away as her mouth dropped open, and I could hear my own voice wailing at me. It was when she started screaming a terrible scream of pain that I could take it no more and pushed her away as I turned to run. I ran faster than I have ever had in my life, trying to get away from this nightmare, fear fueling every single step I took, with the eyes of the dead constantly on me as I pushed past them, their hollow gazes never leaving me for a second. I kept running in a forest that seemed endless yet so crowded by them. I tried screaming as I ran, but I had no voice at all, tears streaming down my face as all I wanted was for this to end. It was then that I came to a sudden stop beneath a giant rotten tree as the hanging corpse of another woman suddenly fell right in front of me. She stared at me with wide eyes as she very softly whispered, "Help me." I froze in place out of fear, noticing that she was not hanging from a rope, but from the long bloody black hair of a large disfigured creature with black eyes. It noticed me, and a horrifying screech escaped it as it tried reaching for me with its long, incredibly thin hand. I backed up, got to my feet, and turned around to run, but then he was standing there, right in front of me, and before I could even try to say something, he gently put his finger on my forehead and pushed.
Sink.
The word was incredibly loud and almost seemed to vibrate across the entire forest. My body went stiff and then instantly numb as I felt myself fall for what felt like hours, and then my world finally went dark, and all was quiet. I woke up in a white room. It took a while to get a hold of myself, but when I finally did, I noticed that it was a hospital room. I felt better, alive again, but still so tired. I got out of the bed I was in and surveyed the room until something in the mirror on the wall caught my eye and I froze. My reflection was standing there with a will of its own, smiling.
You're awake. Finally.
It was him. My reflection was speaking, but it was definitely him. How? I asked, slowly approaching the mirror.
You created me, remember? I exist as long as you do.
He said in a gentle tone. The thought was strangely comforting, but before I could say anything, my reflection turned to look at something in the corner behind me. I followed his gaze and noticed a pale girl standing there with her head down, her hair covering her face. Her dress looked worn out and dirty. I quickly turned around and my body went cold as she was suddenly standing right in front of me. "Help me," she said, almost crying. My heart sank into my stomach. It was the girl from the dead forest that was hanging from the dark creature's hair. A small scream escaped me as I stumbled backwards, and as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. After I caught my breath and composed myself, I turned to my reflection. Why is she still here? How can she be? It was a nightmare, wasn't it? I asked him. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Wasn't it? I asked again, desperately wanting him to agree with me.
I'm sorry, but it doesn't work that way. You must understand you touched death, and once touched, no living person can ever unsee it.
It felt like my legs wanted to give away. My whole body felt numb. No, I can't accept that. I won't. It was strange, but my own reflection stared back at me with what looked like pity as he answered.
You'll have to, I'm afraid. Your life is about to become drastically different, along with your perception of this world. It is one of the reasons I exist.
I stared at him for a while, trying to process everything until one question burned in my mind, a question that deep down I knew the answer to, but I still needed him to answer. Who or what the hell are you? I asked, dreading the answer. My reflection smiled.
My dear,
he said as he leaned in closer until we were basically face to face.
I'm you.